Hello and welcome to this incredible special screening of Nevertheless, a film by filmmaker Sarah Moshman. My name is Caroline Heldman and I'm the Vice President of Research and Insights for the Geena Davis Institute. And here at the Institute, we advance gender justice through media with a focus on intersectionality. And this particular film, Nevertheless, I would argue is the most important film of the last decade when it comes to really unpacking gender injustice. And director and filmmaker Sarah Moshman does this through an intersectional lens, one that focuses on the ways in which women's various experiences lend to different forms of oppression and what we can do to rise up and combat this. So with no further ado, Sarah Moshman.
Wow, hi everyone. That was quite an introduction. I feel very humbled and honored by that, so thank you, Caroline. I'm also just an incredibly huge fan of the work that the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media does and all the studies and research that they provide, so very grateful for them to be hosting today, as well as the IndieFlix Foundation. Shout out to them as well. My name is Sarah Moshman. I'm a documentary filmmaker and the director and producer of this film. So the way this is going to work is shortly we're all going to introduce ourselves as panelists, these four incredible human beings. We will all be on the other end of this screening, which will last 50 minutes. And we'll have a panel discussion that follows for about 30 minutes after the film. So please stick around for that. I've been working on this film for it took me about 2.5 years to make this, and it really began right around when Me Too reignited. As we all know, Tarana Burke started the movement in 2006, and in 2017, in part thanks to Alyssa Milano tweeting, that avalanche really began in October 2017, and that's right around when I was beginning this journey. So we've come a long way, and yet we still have so far to go, and there's so much going on in our world right now. So I'm really grateful for all of you to be sharing this space with me, not only my fellow panelists, but also all of you in the audience. So that's a little bit about me. I'll toss it over to Dr. Kathleen Tarr. If you want to give a quick introduction for yourself so that we can make sure we tune in for the panel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm honored to have been in the film, so thank you for that opportunity. Gratitude to the Ohlone, I want to say, which are the original occupants of the land I'm currently occupying here in the Bay Area. And gratitude to all the viewers. I'm the founder of the Getting Played Symposium on Equity in the Entertainment Industry and Awards, and I couldn't be happier to be here today. Thank you.
And Christine, tell us about you.
Hi there, my name is Christine Walker, and I am very close to Kathleen Tarr and Doctors Kathleen Tarr and Caroline Heldman. We started the first annual Women's Media Summit together. It was 2017 or 2016, and have been working on the issue of gender equity since then. I've been a 30-year long independent film producer, and I also was the CEO of the Provincetown Film Society, where we have several different gender equity initiatives going on. Although right now we are, our staff is all laid off for the time being until we can reopen our cinema and resume our festival activities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being here. And we know Dr. Caroline Heldman, she's also in the film. So everyone, if that's it for now, we will see you in about 50 minutes. So please enjoy the film and stick around for the panel.
We were just talking and no one was listening.
This is an epidemic. There's something going on that we need to get to the bottom of.
Gender inequality is one of the great unmet needs of the human species.
It was like the secret everybody knew, but nobody was talking about yet.
Social capital is a currency. If you're at the top of the hierarchy, you have way more currency than someone below.
Anybody who's on the front lines of these struggles, they will pay a price.
When you've been fired from the biggest show on television, I'd have to pursue a completely different career path.
My dreams were shattered.
My whole image of him have been crushed.
The perpetrators are largely male, 98%. So if we can't fix this, nobody can.
It has to be about how are we complicit in this?
These are the only crimes where we put the victim on trial in a very public way.
When you're going through it, it changes you.
The story raises questions about what's happening to some blue-collar workers.
Not put on this earth for people to take advantage of you. It's not right.
This is rape culture. This is the message you give to girls that you're responsible for a boy's behavior.
We're on the verge of a national reckoning about sexual harassment.
The Me Too movement is bigger than anything we've ever seen for gender justice in the U.S. context.
We are seeing a paradigm shift away from silence and complicity to a world where actions and words have consequences.
Sexual violence and sexism is the anchor that is holding us back.
What happened to me behind the scenes happens to all of us in this society, and it will not stand.
If I say that I care about women, how do I actually put that into process?
It takes one voice. That is how allies can show up.
It has to be where the ones that are the most marginalized are free in order for all of us to be free.
One thing men always complain is that women won't stay quiet. And you're damn right, we won't stay quiet. We'll speak up.
We should be able to change things, but it's not going to be just one person. It's got to be all of us.
What happens when an entire generation feels entitled to their own humanity? What happens next?
Hello and welcome back after that incredible experience of viewing Nevertheless. I know some of you are viewing it, have seen it multiple times. Every time I see it, I get these chills, Sarah. I want to go through and do the formal bios so you know who you're listening to, and about 30 minutes of questions, and we'll open it up to some Q&A from the audience. So thank you all again for joining us. Three heavy hitters from the film industry. Sarah Moshman is an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and TEDx speaker. She has made 3 films. Her first film, The Empowerment Project, Ordinary Women Doing Extraordinary Things, came out in 2014. It has been screened over 700 times around the US and the world. Her second documentary, Losing Sight of Shore, came out in 2017, and it follows an incredible journey of 4 women who rowed across the Pacific Ocean. The film has been released in 190 countries and on Netflix. And of course, you just saw her third film, Nevertheless, and you know it is a masterpiece. Dr. Kathleen Tarr is the founder of the annual Getting Played Symposium on Equity in the Entertainment Industry and Awards, named after her feature documentary, Getting Played, Who's Playing You? Going on its 7th year, the Getting Played Symposium puts into conversation experts from entertainment, law, psychology, community organizing, and academia, and it elevates recognition of individuals whose lesser celebrated contributions are crucial for evolution of the industry. Dr. Tarr is also an award-winning vocalist and filmmaker with stage, film, television, and commercial acting credits. She's a former Skadden Fellow whose artistic expertise intersects with her years as a civil rights and human rights attorney and her decade-long endeavor to usher Hollywood's entertainment and employment practices further toward inclusion, equity, and diversity. Dr. Tarr also teaches at Stanford University in the Writing and Rhetoric program. And last but certainly not least, Christine Walker is an award-winning producer. She's the president of New Globe Films and the recent CEO and executive director of the Provincetown Film Society. She is also the founder and former president of Work Works, a feature film finance and production company. Christine has dedicated her entire career to supporting independent production filmmakers. And in addition to working on opportunities for hundreds of independent filmmakers, she herself has produced and directed and written and worked on many projects. You may know her work. Some of it is very well known, American Splendor, if you've seen the film Howl, or if you've seen the film Head of State with Chris Rock, you have seen Christine's work. So this is just a fantastic panel of women who've been in the industry for a long time. And so I want to get right into some questions, starting with you, Sarah. How did this film come about? What is the origin story here?
Yeah, so this was in 2017 for me. My second film, as you mentioned, Losing Sight of Shore, had come out on Netflix. And I was really hungry for a new project. And at the same time, I was pregnant with my daughter. I was about 6 or 7 months pregnant at the time. And as many parents feel when their impending parenthood is upon them, I wanted to try to make the world any bit safer or better for her to exist in, as so many of us do. And at the same time, a lot of these sexual harassment stories were really surfacing, like Susan Fowler at Uber and the Justin Callback story at Sequoia Capital, I think it was. There was a lot kind of in the ether, even before the Me Too post and avalanche that followed. So around that same time, I had a particularly sexist interaction with my neighbor. And it was a very eye-opening comment that he said to me. In short, basically, when we told him we were having a girl, excuse my language coming up, he said, you know, it's fine. If you're having a girl, all you have to do is think about that someday someone's going to fuck your daughter. And I was so shocked that that was the first thing this person thought to say to me and my husband, by the way, about having a girl, like shepherding a girl through the world. Immediately she's going to be sexualized, and before she's even born. It was such a disappointing moment, to say the least. And so I did the only thing I know how to do in a moment like that, which is to pick up the camera and get to work. And so I started to arrange interviews about sexual harassment with sexual harassment training prevention specialists and employment attorneys and incredible professors and authors like you, Caroline. And I just started asking the tough questions and trying to figure out what was I trying to say, and how would I ever possibly encapsulate this movement and this issue into one film. And so I quickly realized that I would need individual people's stories to root the film so that it wouldn't be all informational, all educational. I really wanted to create as much empathy as possible through the stories of the people that you saw. I should mention there is a longer version of the film as well. What we just watched was 50 minutes, so we saw 4 of the stories, and there's an 80-minute version of the film that has 7 stories total. So we followed 7 stories of men and women who have experienced sexual harassment, assault, or rape in the workplace or in school context. And then we have such an incredible chorus of experts like Caroline and Kathleen that get to weave it all together for us and really make sense of it. And so my intention with this film, what I wanted to do differently than the other films that were out there, was not to just point the finger at any one bad person or company. Of course, that's important to hold people accountable for their actions, but my view has always been, well, how are we all complicit in this in some way? How can we all use our positions of privilege to be an allyship to one another? And that includes women. I never wanted it to be about, okay, men, here's how you can solve the problem for us. That just isn't constructive. It's about how can we all sit at the table and come together and be better for each other and for that next generation and generations to come. So I've learned a ton. I am no expert, but the curiosity is really what drove me. And I feel like every day I'm learning so much. And it was such a pleasure to sit and interview people like Kathleen and Caroline, to ask those tough questions. I mean, you saw very few sound bites that I was able to select and put in the film, and there's, you know, hours and hours and hours of information beyond that. So it was a lot of work to put together, but I'm really proud of what it's become.
It's incredible. I mean, I can't say that enough. Just being able to show, you know, a film that's, well, this version under an hour to my students, it's like a light bulb goes off. It's their click moment often. Sarah, you had talked about the timing of this, right? That you started making the film and then the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement in Hollywood really kind of happened. The floodgates opened. What was it like to be making this film while that was happening, and how can the film contribute to that movement?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? When your film is very timely, it feels very exciting and like a dream come true, and then kind of also simultaneously like a nightmare, because you want to do justice by all these stories, and it just felt like I could never make it fast enough to honor what was happening in our country, and yet also realizing that this would hopefully and will continue to go on in terms of the movement part for years. So there was certainly a lot of days where I felt doubt of like, who do I think I am making this? You know, like, what am I trying to do here? Like, is this even worth it? What's the point? You know, like, what am I really, is this ever going to be anything? I think any filmmaker feels that every day at some point, no matter what film they're making. But I was really endlessly inspired by the stories that I was hearing in the news and the interviews I was watching, not only as part of the research process for this film, but just in the world. You couldn't, you know, walk 10 feet without hearing all of these Me Too stories. And then, of course, doing the actual research and doing the interviews, we probably did about 45 or 50 on-camera interviews for the film, and hundreds more over the phone and over Zoom or Skype, just to understand, what it is that's happening or was happening. So it was really hard to discern how to boil all of that down. And so there was a lot, of course, that one has to leave out in a film like this. We had interviewed some people about, mandatory arbitration agreements and non-disclosure agreements, and a lot more of the legal side was explored, I would say. And then it just ultimately, there wasn't quite a place for that, which doesn't mean it's not important. So it's a hard task to make a film like this, where it's a massive social issue that you're trying to boil down into something that's still entertaining, still cinematic, but informative, and something that people can hopefully have a dialogue afterwards.
So along the lines of the media industry, many members in the audience right now are in the industry, right? Most of our members are. What advice do you have for early career women who are navigating this industry, and how do these issues come up in Hollywood?
Oh my gosh. I would say for those early in their career, know that you're not alone. I hope that's the one, if we have one takeaway from the Me Too movement, and there are many, it's that this is not just happening to you, it's happening to you and your coworkers and your friends. That was another big driving force for me, as having heard stories throughout my entire career from friends, and certainly having my own stories of sexual harassment. And so many times you're led to believe that you're alone, that it's an isolated incident, that you just can't take a joke. That's so much of the dialogue that we hear. In fact, I remember so clearly being in a sexual harassment training session for a television show I was working on, and all anyone did, especially the men, was just laugh the whole time. So how are you supposed to take that seriously, like you actually have a course of action if it happens to you, which it might and will and did? What are you supposed to do when you don't feel supported? So for anyone starting out early in their career and feeling like this is only happening to them, I promise it's not. And of course, you have to take things into account, like your economic livelihood and your financial situation, all of that. It's not easy to speak up, and not everyone is going to. That's not what this film or this conversation is about. It's not always, go speak up right now. That might not always make sense for you, but just know that you have resources, there is recourse, and there are people here to support you, especially now after Me Too has unfolded. You have a lot at your disposal that women that came before you did not have.
Great words of wisdom. Thank you, Sarah. Dr. Tarr, in the film, you commented on Imani Lyle's case involving friends. What do you think might be different if she came forward today with that same case?
Yeah, and every time I see the film, and most of the attorneys I know at the time who knew about the case, it's so upsetting every single time to see it again, and to think about what happened to her and what we lost. She's hilarious, and she was a great writer, but we've missed that. So I think certainly the case specifically, what I think would be different is that it would actually be set for trial. So Imani's case was summarily dismissed by the Supreme Court of California. The decision was made that no reasonable trier of fact, which are jurors, would find the conduct to be sexually harassing or a hostile environment, which is absolutely outrageous. And I think certainly what would happen today with people being a little more savvy about the entertainment industry and actually what's happening, as well as there being a little more belief in women's stories and about what has happened to them, I think certainly the case would have been set for trial. That would mean, of course, that I'm sure Warner Brothers would have settled the case. And so it would not necessarily have made it. But absolutely, I don't think you would have had a long list of notables and who's who in the entertainment industry signing on to an amicus to say, no, this is what has to happen. In this particular, and Sarah and I have talked about this before, in this particular 50-minute version of the film, part of what is taken out of what I say is considered so profane that, even when I showed it at my symposium, I gave a warning about some of the language, because what was said, and it was said about Courtney Cox, it wasn't said about Monica Geller, her character. It was this absolutely horrendous, profane thing said that has been taken out, and the idea, and Imani had to endure all of that for so long, and to the idea that somehow that's not harassing is a huge problem regarding the industry. But I think today, to answer your question really directly, I just think it would be set for trial rather than dismissed.
So there's been some progress, and you've played a major role in that progress, right? As an advocate, you also have used the law in order to bring about change. I'm wondering if you can comment on how you see the power of the law in making Hollywood more diverse and making the workplace more inclusive.
Well, certainly one of the ideas I come back to and keep trying to persuade people to consider, and it's not necessarily easy to do, but it's that workers are workers, and in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, they are still workers. I think because so many of us, and including me as a child, it was this magical experience that I had with a film or with a television show or whatever it was, and you forget that these are people who have gone to a job and are doing a job. And that is what you are watching. And so the Supreme Court of California in the Lyle case, I think also lost track of the fact that workers in the industry are actually workers. So the employment discrimination laws that apply in every other business in the US have to apply to Hollywood and to entertainment. It's not a unique business in the sense that these laws should not apply. Certainly there are day-to-day facts and experiences that make it different, but the protection of workers should be the same. But that's, it's been a very difficult idea to pursue, and certainly our justice system still has a long way to go to catch up to that, and people who are consumers as well as people who work in the industry have a little ways to go as well.
Still talking about the industry, we've seen the peak of a recent peak of the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw the emergence of the Me Too movement. What role do you think social movements play in making media better, and what evidence have you seen of progress in media?
Well, I do think the Me Too movement was terrific for this idea that women are to be believed when they talk about the experiences of sexual harassment and assault. And you made that point in the film, and it's a terrific point. And I think more people actually believe that to be true. So that in general, people believe that when women aren't speaking of their experiences, that it's truthful. I think certainly movements, including Black Lives Matter, I think movements like that, we're not really at a point where we believe Black people by necessarily to the same degree about their experiences, but I think we're moving positively in that direction to actually believing what people tell us about their experience. I think the challenge is that most of us, we will believe it in the abstract, and then when it comes down to people we know, we don't. So it becomes, this person I cherish didn't do this thing. They could not have done this thing, right? And so then that becomes one of the barriers. So I do think part of what movements can do is also usher in a little bit more self-awareness, which I think they're doing. So I think that progress is happening, although as the movie says, nevertheless, we have a long way to go.
Thank you, Dr. Tar. Christine, longtime filmmaker. You've been in the industry for many decades. We've talked a lot about, been critical of media, been critical of the employment environment in Hollywood. What are some ways in which media can be a force for good? I mean, a lot of us are here because we believe that, right? The Geena Davis Institute, we believe that. Can you speak to that point?
Yes, absolutely. Well, look at Sarah's film. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And Sarah, I want to commend you. One of my favorite parts of the film is that your inclusion of men. I think that we have a long way to go when we're trying to involve men into the conversation. And I think you did a great job of doing that in the film. From my perspective, when we talk about media as a positive force, I'm thinking about both in front of and behind the scenes. I, as a producer for so many years, have firmly believe, and I've lived it, that the makeup of a producing team and the crew are as important to promoting racial and gender equity than the stories that we're telling on the screen. I was just thinking about the Ellen DeGeneres show, and here's a person who suffered early on in her career because of her sexual orientation. And having come through to the other side, she was extremely relatable. And she's lost some of that relatability because she lost sight of the responsibility that her privilege afforded her. and then failing to use that privilege to protect those who suffered prejudice in our own company. Beyond that, in this day where people are questioning the fake media or authentic journalism, storytelling through film is a way for people to connect to individuals and cultures that they might not ever interact with, either because of their political leanings or due to geographical circumstances or whatever. For many people, film may be the only medium where people are interacting with folks other than themselves. And as a result, it's powerful and sometimes the only way to promote empathy, as Sarah pointed out, and empathy and understanding.
And I'll pose the same question to you, Christine, that I posed to Sarah, which is, what advice do you have for folks who are starting out or mid-career? What can you tell them about navigating the workplace in Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sarah. There are a lot more resources. There's support for filmmakers. I do worry about the COVID and what is going to happen for women. I mean, we do know that more women lost their jobs than men. And when people return back to work and children may not be able to go to school, the people who are going to be affected are probably more women than men. And so I worry about what the changes, how that will affect women. You know, before COVID, the numbers were increasing. But now, you know, when people return to the workforce, I'll be interested to know if those numbers will be the same, if as many women will be making films as were before the pandemic. And I'm not saying that to discourage people or young women coming into the field. What I'm saying is that we have to be ever vigilant and diligent in making sure that we're interrogating these systems, that we're aware of these changes, and that we press on. And even for myself, before COVID, I stepped down from my CEO position because I'm writing a film and I'm intending on directing it. And now I'm, you know, and I was very excited about the opportunity for me. I've worked on more than 20 films and I thought, you know, I'm ready. This is my chance to direct. And I'm nervous now. I'm nervous at the opportunity that I might have as an older woman in the industry that I might have to direct. And so I have to be honest with being nervous about what the opportunities are, but I'm very hopeful because there are women like yourselves, there are films like Sarah's, there are people who are in Sarah's film that that make me feel hopeful about the future. And I think it's all about sort of finding your village, finding people to support you. And I can't say enough about finding your community. And it's through community that I think you'll be able to get through.
Yeah, thank you for being vulnerable, Christine, about those fears. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna pepper you all with some questions from the audience. This question is for you, Sarah. Casey asks, after understanding all of this, where should we spend our time to move the needle? Empower our youth, politics, media? What can have the most impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly this question is for all of us to decipher and understand what our role is moving forward. For me, it's certainly in this media space. For this film specifically with Nevertheless, instead of putting it online and trying to go to one of these streaming platforms and getting the film up, we are really dedicated to the impact that a film like this can make in a school setting, in a workplace setting, in a corporation. And so this is really the only way to view the film, is to take part in a virtual screening, and anyone can host their own screening of the film, which we'll put the information in the chat. But we're really dedicated to the impact that this film can make by having a discussion guide that goes with the film with questions and activities and curriculum for students and a glossary of terms. We're really passionate about this not being a passive viewing experience, but actually being quite active and something that can live on in a workplace setting. And I never thought this would be my dream, but I would really love it if this film was part of sexual harassment training prevention. That would be amazing, considering all the sexual harassment training that we've all been through that has been very much a joke and not taken seriously. What if a film like this was shown instead, and a real dialogue was created between employees and managers and supervisors and CEOs? So that's what we're working towards with my fabulous distributor IndieFlix and the IndieFlix Foundation, which helped host this very event. That's what we're most passionate about. And it's slower, deeper, harder work than just searching out for a streaming platform and hoping to make a licensing or some kind of deal. And I've done that too. What's most exciting to us is what this film can do when paired with that activism. So that's my view of this issue in my corner of the world, but I think I love hearing about how everyone wants to help move the needle forward in their best way. I mean, Caroline, you're writing books and doing research and changing the world in your sector. I'd be interested to hear what everyone else thinks of how to move the needle forward with the talents that they have.
Yeah, Dr. Tar, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think what has been striking me about it, and so much of the film that speaks to me, is not only that obviously Sarah is a much better filmmaker than I am for my original doc, which I had no experience, but I had the same motivation, which was to make this documentary because I had actually been fired from a musical I'd been in for 4 months after protesting being directed to be blacker. And so, you know, and that was one of a long list of life experiences. The first job I really wanted as a kid was to play in the NFL. I was not allowed to play organized football in high school because I was a girl. I wanted to fly fighters in the Navy. I was not allowed to be a combat pilot because I was female. My job, you know, the transition from being an attorney to being in the entertainment industry is because my managing attorney, the boss, pushed me down at a party and demanded a sexual massage. It was a staff party. And then certainly in the industry, as we all know, it's not like I walked out of practicing law into an industry absent sexual harassment. So from having a director of photography have me stand in a way so that he could look through my skirt, which I didn't know until the lead pulled me away, to having I was in the running for the lead in a pilot, and that was abandoned after the creator invited me to his hot tub and I said no. And so I was ghosted after that, for not even considered anymore. I think for all of those experiences, obviously everyone in this group has participated in my symposium, and everyone's been recognized and honored for the incredible work they're doing. I think maybe what people haven't thought about is their own individual lives. And I think one of the interviewees in the film talked about, you know, he's always the protagonist in every scene of his life. And so part of that, I would ask people to recast their storylines. So when they're in a particular moment, whoever you're thinking of as the lead, which for a lot of us ends up being male, for a lot of us ends up being white, ends up being able-bodied, a certain age, like for us to recast that and start noticing who is in the other part of the scene, who we've put in the background, who should actually be elevated to a supporting role, who's in a supporting role, who should be elevated to the lead, and to really in our own minds start recasting some of these stories. Because as I think about the life experience I've had and some of the hardest moments, part of it has been because everyone around in that situation decided I was the least important person in that moment, even though for me, you know, this moment of harassment or discrimination was hugely important. So I think everyone has such great ideas, and I think just that's my contribution to what I think isn't said, because I think a lot of us individually don't know what to do in our day-to-day as far as how we treat these moments, and maybe recasting those scenes will help.
Thank you. Christine, did you want to weigh in where you think we should be putting our energies?
Well, I think we should be putting our energies in telling more, better, building better stories, and encouraging all kinds of individuals to tell their stories. And I agree wholeheartedly with Kathleen. You know, the film I'm writing is a film about my elderly Hawaiian aunt. And I've never seen a story told. She's Hawaiian. She's a hula master. I've never seen a film about her. And so I want to tell that story. And I think that we need to encourage people to tell stories that we haven't seen. I think the one thing I do believe is in this day, in this moment of reckoning, there's a huge appetite for stories, for news stories, for stories about different people of different cultures. And that is very exciting.
Someone has commented, Christine, yes, our stories matter. And Sarah, I wasn't trying to dodge the question, just trying to be a gracious host, but I just bring what you all have said into one place. I'm a big believer in electoral politics and voting and running for office, and then the power on the outside pressure of social movements and storytelling and litigation and taking to the streets. And awareness raising and media literacy campaigns. And so I think, you know, one of the myths that we like to tell ourselves is that progress is natural, and it just, you know, time marches forward, and progress for women and people of color and people with disabilities and people who are otherwise marginalized, LGBTQ plus folks, that somehow progress just happens. But it doesn't. It happens because people have their foot on the gas and they're constantly pushing. And here's where the metaphor breaks down, right? Because there are lots of cars pushing lots of different ways, lots of pressure points. And so, yeah, big believer in doing all of that, but also as people who I think everyone probably right now in this space are, we're deeply dedicated to changing the world and shifting the world. But the way we do that best is to focus on generally one specific topic, one specific tactic, and then using a whole lot of self-care because it's a marathon. I want to put out another one last question for well, the group. One for you in particular, Kathleen. My boss is a woman and her boss is a woman. Our CEO is a woman, our head of HR is a woman. Yet sexist language is prevalent in meetings as well as mandatory training videos. I've called it out, as have others, but it hasn't changed. What else can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, Caroline, it obviously in the big scheme of things, it takes a community and a collaboration, right? It takes all of those most successful movements have required litigation and community organizing and media, like they've required everybody together. In a particular workplace, if you're in the United States anyway, and if you're in the state of California, obviously it depends on the country and the state that you're in, but the Department of Fair Employment and Housing is available in California to take complaints. Also, Time's Up, Legal Defense Fund, certainly around sexist language. They are also now a resource that wasn't around before the Me Too movement. And all of these resources, you can consult with attorneys around that space to shape the culture. Could certainly have a screening of Nevertheless, bring in all those things, but you also have to figure out where your energy is and how much energy you have to do what. So if it is to just go to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, go ahead and do that. If it's to get consultation from a private attorney, if it's to actually talk to HR itself, or to talk to, when I was experiencing sexual harassment at one of my legal jobs, I actually asked Eva Patterson, who is the executive director of the Equal Justice Society now. At the time, she was with Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And one of the approaches I had before I made a formal complaint was to have her come in and to give a training and to talk to all staff, to have that outside presence. And she was, you know, so, and she still is so amazing and so reputable to come in to do that. So there are multiple approaches. You kind of have to decide where, you know, what you want to risk, what kind of conversation do you want to have. Certainly, I would say at the very least, you can consult with most attorneys for free to just have a conversation to get it to understand what your options are.
Thank you, Dr. Tar. One last question for you, Christine. Someone would like you to speak further about the role that men can play as allies and advocates.
Well, you know, I have 3 daughters, and I have this conversation with my husband all the time. I think one of the roles they can play is to really listen. sometimes what I find is that men in their, they want to be part of the conversation, but they're trying to explain to us how we need to be looking at the problem. And that happens a lot, even with well-meaning men. They want to explain, how we should be looking at it and explain to their peers how they need to be addressing it. And I think that it's very difficult in many, anecdotally in many conversations that I've had just with my husband and other people, it's difficult for them to listen. I had a conversation with friends about the use of pronouns. And I know this is a little off of the topic of women, but it's very relevant and important to this conversation. There are people who want to be referred to as they. My niece, she identifies she represents as a cis female, but she wants to be referred to as they. And just have that conversation with men. And you will understand, if you have that conversation with a man, you will understand how difficult it is for them to get beyond that position of being so privileged that they have been defining what we think about history, what we think about pronouns, what we think about racism and sexism, as long as they can remember. And so there's an opportunity for a paradigm shift, I think, here, but it starts with really getting men to listen. I wish I were more articulate about this, but it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, and I keep going back to, you need to listen, and then maybe you'll have a much different perspective.
Thank you, Christine. The last question for you, Sarah. A person writes, "This is so powerful, so much to dialogue and bring so much to light. How does, if at all, sexual assault or victims of domestic violence fall into this?" She writes, "I'm a survivor of 19 years of abuse during the marriage. I am fortunate and was able to take my ex to trial. He was facing 28 felonies, and they left out the sexual abuse because the district attorney didn't feel they could win those and would muddy other charges." So can you extend your analysis in the film to these topics as well?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so sorry that that has been your situation, but you're here and you're strong and you're a warrior for even taking part in this conversation. I'm impressed. But truly, I will say, when I set out to make this film, I thought, I'm making a film about sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm over here, like in this corner. And I very quickly realized that was a fool's errand. And I think, honestly, Caroline, your interview did help me think of this very differently, and as well as Rashad Beal, who's in the film. He said it best. It's like we need to think of society as this tree. And if sexual harassment is just one branch on the tree, it doesn't really matter if you cut off one branch, right? You still have the roots. The tree is still there. And I thought that was such a powerful way to think about our society. And so although the film doesn't directly talk about domestic violence, that is absolutely a branch on the very same tree. And so when we talk about toxic masculinity, and when we talk about the way that we're raising our children, it all plays into all of these gender-based violence issues. And as Christine was talking, I was just thinking, it's such a parallel conversation right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, because I, as a white cisgender straight woman, have been thinking so much about my place and what racist behavior have I taken part in during my life, and that I'm ashamed to be realizing, right? So I think hopefully that's a lot of what men are going through when they think about the Me Too movement, especially white men, right? So white cisgender men are in all ways at the top of this societal pyramid, whether we like it or not. And so when I think about how we want more men in allyship with us, and we want them to listen, and we want them to take part and see their role in the solution, I think it's the exact same conversation that we all as white people need to be having with ourselves and with each other about our role in allyship, or however you describe allyship to people of color, to Black people. So it's a really, really interesting time in our country, in our world. Of course, there's a lot of pain and struggle, but I'm encouraged by those parallel journeys because they're absolutely connected and they are one, just like the tree is all connected. So thank you for sharing your pain and your struggle, and we can all learn from, you know, being more open and vulnerable like you. So thank you.
Thank you, this exceptional panel. You've been vulnerable, you've illuminated things, you've provided your expertise, your analysis, just so authentic. I love this. On behalf of the Geena Davis Institute for Gender and Media at Mount St. Mary's and our fantastic members who attended this event, thank you from the bottom of our heart, Sarah Moshman, for this important project, and hopefully everyone will bring this to their communities and the dialogue in the community can continue. Thank you all.
Thank you. And thank you, Andrea.